Inflammation, that's what I got. You turn the heat on me, some like it hot. Call out the engine, ring up the station, I am on the spot.
Introducing a classic patty melt with a spicy twist.
Like it or not.
So my name is Jerry Croft. I'm a professor, psych prof in California, and this talk is about propaganda. And I would like the psychology of propaganda. And I'd like you to look at a set of photographs. This is from the 50s. And just store your emotional reactions. What are your emotional reactions to what you see? Why we have the youngest customers in the business. Nothing does it like 7-Up. Coca-Cola was not to be outdone. For a better start in life, start cola earlier. How soon is too soon? And here's Santa Claus urging you to give cigarettes, Lucky Strikes, to your friends for Christmas. And there's a doctor who, in the small print, it says he works hard and you can trust him. And more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. That's pretty close to a recommendation, isn't it? And don't worry, darling, you didn't burn the beer. At least you can drink Schlitz when your wife can't even cook. Oh, and down at the bottom, you mean a woman can open up a bottle of ketchup? Wow, how did they get so smart? So you think that in the past, oh my God, people were living in a trance. They were brainwashed. I mean, here you're giving poisons to your friends for Christmas. Doctors are recommending that you ingest something in your lungs that causes lung cancer. Women are demeaned. There's no sense of emancipation of women at all. It's and they're giving sugar water. This has over 10 teaspoons of sugar to a little 4-month-old baby. And you think, my God, those people were crazy. Well, the purpose of today's talk is a controversial idea that we are just as much in a trance and hypnotized by the media as the generation of our parents and grandparents who watched those Mad Men commercials. Things are not any better for us. We are not more liberated and more aware of the world. We're just as much victimized by it. So this talk comes from a book I wrote called Duped: Delusion, Denial, and the End of the American Dream. Now, all the references for this talk are in that book, so I'm not going to give you references here. But let's talk about some statistics about our current lives. Kids spend currently 45 hours per week in screen time. That means TV, internet, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. That's a lot of time. The average American now spends 9 hours per day using the media. 50% of American children from 8 to 18 report that the TV is on in their home constantly. So we are really glued to. Some people say outside of sleep, work, that's the majority of what we do, screen time. We're glued to our screens. So the question is, are we getting dumber? For example, over 90% of fourth graders could not identify a photograph of Abraham Lincoln. Not too impressive. 75% of 17-year-olds could not identify who was the head of Germany in World War II. 30% of high school students did not know how long it took the Earth to orbit the sun. Half of U.S. fourth graders did not know the meaning of the word puzzle. So you can say, well, the media is really dumbing people down and we're getting less and less educated. But I'd like to give you a contrary position. Okay, 75% of 17-year-olds knew what city was in the zip code 90210. Well, that's pretty good. That's pretty smart. isn't it? They know what city that zip code is in. Now, they know that because there was a television program called 90210. But 96% of American school children can identify Ronald McDonald. It's as if we're living in a playhouse, which is the media-created fantasy world that we spend 9 hours a day doing. And we know everything about that playhouse. We know who Kim Kardashian is, but we don't know who Scott Carpenter is. We've substituted our fantasy reality for real reality, if you want to put it that way. So I'm not so sure we are dumbing down as much as the fact that we are living increasingly in the trance without knowing it. So the propaganda tools that we're going to talk about that keep us in this fog: reframing, repeated affirmations, vicarious and imitative learning, distraction and denial, classical and operant conditioning. So get ready, because we're now engaged in the process of media literacy, which means we're pulling off the veil of propaganda and clearing out the fog and starting to see what's really going on with the mass media and us and our consciousness. I'm going to start with the easiest one first, reframing, okay? In 1984, George Orwell writes a book called 1984, and there's a whole propaganda ministry in his fictional book that writes propaganda and that rewrites, makes bad things sound good, makes garbage smell like perfume with the right language. And the language was called Newspeak. Okay? So here, and it's basically reframing, putting nice words on bad things. George Bush was not the greatest environmental president of American history. He cut gasoline mileage requirements. He cut rules and regulations on diesel emissions. He weakened rules protecting rivers from pollution. He allowed more nitrogen oxide, mercury, and sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere. So if we went to a guy and said, how do you feel about more sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere? Guy on the street says, well, I don't think that's very good. I think that isn't that called smog? Well, what do you think about more mercury in the atmosphere? Well, I think that's bad for your brain, isn't it? I don't think I support that. Okay, so what is the name for the legislation that George Bush introduced that weakened all of these regulations? Well, here comes Newspeak. It was called the Clear Skies Act and the Clean Water Act. Really? Really? Well, how do you feel about the Clear Skies Act? Oh, I think I like clear skies. I would support that. How do you feel about the Clean Water Act? I'm definitely in favor of clean water, absolutely. Okay, so there's reframing for you. It gets worse. In the last 20 years, 55,000 American factories have closed, fired their workers, moved to China, to Vietnam, to Indonesia, to the Dominican Republic. They say that 6 million jobs were permanently lost due to this process. Chinese workers make our toys and make virtually everything sold in Walmart, and they get paid $3 an hour. In Bangladesh, women are making clothes that are sold in Target and JCPenney. They earn $36 a month. That's about 25 cents an hour for that shirt that you bought at JCPenney. Now, Detroit is a very good example of this process. We don't have a name for it yet. In Detroit, in 1960, Detroit was an incredibly vibrant city. They had 290,000 manufacturing jobs. Today, there are 27,000 manufacturing. 90% of the manufacturing jobs left Detroit. That's a picture of the General Motors building, okay? Empty, windows broken, all right? But there's a brand new Ford factory, state-of-the-art, beautiful, makes 250,000 Ford Focuses every year. But guess where it's located? It's located in Hermosillo, Mexico. And they make 250,000 Fords there and send them to the United States duty-free. Detroiters don't like that. The average wage paid to those workers in that factory is $3 an hour. Now, I ask audiences, oh, how many of you have ever worked for $3 an hour? Most everybody doesn't even raise their hand. Senior citizens will say, I once worked for $3 an hour in the 1950s. Well, this is 2013, and that's where Fords are made today. And the result is, it's not that General Motors was making gas guzzlers. It's partly true, but 90% of Detroit's good jobs left. And Detroit closed 50% of its schools, okay? It currently is in bankruptcy. That's a picture of a great, famous Detroit movie theater. Frank Sinatra played there once. So what do you call this? Detroiters don't like what happened, okay? But this is the name given for this process. It's called globalization, and it's called free trade. So what do you think about globalization? Oh, I think I like globalization. That sounds modern. That sounds international. I think I support globalization. How do you feel about free trade? Oh, I'm in favor of free trade. I like anything that's free, you know. I think that's a good thing. And so, bad things are made to sound sweet and nice with reframing. Here's a little video on this subject.
Put it, euphemistic language that conceals reality.
Poor people used to live in slums. Now the economically disadvantaged occupy substandard housing in the inner cities. And they're broke. They're broke. They don't have a negative cash flow position. They're broke.
And today, America's love affair with semantics has given birth to a new phrase to describe the rich.
Job creators in America basically are on strike.
Increasing taxes on job creators. This administration and this president, policies are hostile to job creators.
Instead of just saying the wealthy who make over $250,000 a year, if you say job creator, then you say, well, we can't raise their taxes. They're the ones who create jobs. When in reality, when their taxes were higher under Bill Clinton, 3 times as many jobs were created.
The propensity to add softer terms to the English lexicon has surged over the decades, particularly when it comes to military-related language.
Damaging euphemisms, like when instead of saying innocent civilians were killed in a drone strike, you say there was collateral damage. Collateral damage, which to me is the worst expression. No, it's innocent men, women, and children were killed. And the collateral damage sounds like a real estate transaction.
Allied soldiers shooting each other has become known as
Friendly fire.
kidnapping, and transferring a terrorist suspect is called
Extraordinary rendition.
and the torture America's war prisoners might endure is referred to as
Enhanced interrogation.
Now we're going to start propaganda technique number 2. And this sort of builds on itself, but I want to warn you about something. The purpose of propaganda is ultimately to make you feel better about something, about garbage, about killing, about whatever. So as we take off the veils of propaganda and become more media literate, we're starting to look at things that are a little harder to look at. This is really not an entertaining lecture. We're no pain, no gain here. As we become more conscious of the propaganda in our lives, we have to confront things that propaganda protects us from. Propaganda is kind of like a bandage, and we're pulling that bandage off, so fasten your seatbelts. Repeated affirmations is essentially this. I'm going to try to tell you that 2 + 2 is 5, and how am I going to convince you of that? Well, let's say I got Stephen Hawking to talk in his way, in a muffled tone, about the new mathematics which allows 2 + 2 to be 5. And then I got a Nobel Prize winner who said, yes, there are conditions under which 2 + 2 could be 5. And then another speaker and another speaker. And pretty soon it's repeated so much that you start to believe that maybe 2 + 2 is 5 or could be 5. That's what repeated affirmations is. Say the lie over and over again with authority figures, and it starts to be believed. Here's Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister of Nazi Germany. Propaganda must therefore always be essential and repetitious. It must confine itself to a few points and repeat them over and over. Okay, thank you, Mr. Goebbels. Now, George Bush said almost exactly the same thing. See, in my line of work, you got to keep repeating things over and over and over to kind of catapult the propaganda. Well, that's exactly what happened with Iraq. But before we talk about Iraq, I need to introduce a psychological term, a delusion. So imagine there's a guy who has a cat, and he sees that his cat went over to his neighbor's house, and the neighbor is feeding his cat. He doesn't like that. He doesn't like his neighbor feeding the cat. He doesn't say anything, but it really makes him mad. And he thinks the neighbor is poisoning his cat. So after a couple months of this, his cat dies, and he is very, very upset. And he believes that that guy, a delusion, by the way, is a false theory about the world, a false idea. Okay? So he, like George Bush, wants to have this cat inspected for weapons of mass destruction. And he sends the cat off to a toxicologist for an autopsy. And it comes back, the cat died of natural causes. Sorry, no poisons, no toxins, no weapons of mass destruction. Then he's not satisfied. He goes for another autopsy and another inspection. The same result, nothing, sorry, no toxins. And he's still not happy, still doesn't believe it. And he finally gets himself so worked up, he walks over to the neighbor's house, confronts him, shoots him, and kills him. Okay? So that's a hypothetical example of a person who is mentally ill, who is suffering from a delusion. Okay? Now, we have that under our belt. So let's now talk about repeated affirmations and the delusions that we had about Iraq. We had two major delusions. First delusion, first false idea, was that Saddam Hussein orchestrated or had some role in the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. And the second delusion was that Saddam Hussein was developing nuclear weapons. Now, let's not talk about the second because we know that that's false, okay? But we'll talk about the first. The first lie is that Saddam Hussein had a connection with those 9/11 hijackers. Mohammed Atta, the Saudi kingpin of the 9/11 attacks, secretly met with an Iraqi intelligence official in Prague on April 9th, 2001. Oh, yes, he did. And that's the connecting point between 9/11 and Saddam Hussein and Iraq and why we had to invade them. The truth is that Mohammed Atta was in Sarasota, Florida then. He was making calls on his cell phone on April 6th, April 9th, April 10th, April 11th. He used his ATM card in the United States on April 4th. He was never in Prague. He didn't meet with any intelligence official. But we're trying to say 2 + 2 is 5 here. And there's a great need to do that. So Bush says, talking about Saddam Hussein, this is a man who's got connections to Al-Qaeda. He's a threat because he's dealing with Al-Qaeda. That's because they met in Prague, right? We're taking the fight that those who attacked us, said George Bush. Well, did Saddam Hussein attack us? Did he have anything to do with Mohammed Atta, the 9/11 hijackers? Are we taking the fight to those who attacked us? To Vice President Cheney, he did meet with a senior official of Iraqi intelligence in Czechoslovakia last April, several months before the attack. Czech police said no. The FBI said no. There's no evidence that that happened. Now, you're going to keep repeating that and repeating that and repeating that.
Saddam Hussein aids and protects terrorists, including members of Al-Qaeda.
There was a relationship between Iraq and Al-Qaeda.
Saddam, Al-Qaeda, Saddam, Al-Qaeda, Saddam, the Al-Qaeda, Saddam, Al-Qaeda.
It is only a matter of time before terrorist states armed with weapons of mass destruction develop the capability to deliver those weapons to U.S. cities.
What we're giving you are facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence.
The man who hates America. Saddam Hussein aids and protects terrorists.
So that wasn't just the extent of the propaganda. The big pinnacle was just before we went to a war against Iraq. Colin Powell spoke in front of the UN with a PowerPoint presentation, and the entire mass media went crazy.
First of all, it should be noted that Colin Powell's speech to the United Nations was theater, a masterful theater, effective theater at the time. Here's a man who has tremendous credibility, who presents himself to the Security Council, to the American people, to the international public, and stares the camera in the eye and says he knows Iraq has weapons of mass destruction.
So, Powell, by the way, to this day says that was the lowest point in his political and military career, the moment that he is most embarrassed about. Okay, he feels that he was conned by the CIA and by the Bush administration. So, nonetheless, America's war propagandists spread the word. It's not Powell and Bush, it's a whole bunch of people. Okay, these are the people who are on American television day after day after day, telling the American people that 2 + 2 is 5.
Media in this country who would tell us the truth.
The rallying around the president, around the flag, and around the troops clearly has begun.
And we're going to win!
You really have to be with the troops to understand that kind of adrenaline rush that they get.
I just want you to know, I think Navy SEALs rock.
The pictures you're seeing are absolutely phenomenal.
When my country is at war, I want my country to win.
Iraqi opposition has faded in the face of American power.
What you're watching here is truly historic television and journalism.
It was absolutely electrifying. They actually had to strap me in with my camera at the back of the plane.
An awesome synchronized killing machine.
There is an inherent bias in the coverage of the American press in general.
Am I slanted and biased? You damn well bet I am.
And proud of it, too. So, as we succumbed, in effect, to repeated affirmations, these are the main figures that appeared on American television day after day after day, saying that Saddam Hussein had a relationship to Al-Qaeda, he had something to do with 9/11, he was making nuclear bombs and using weapons of mass destruction, and these guys got an awful lot of attention. Now, if you look at the total number of times those folks were on TV, primetime TV, this is from the Vanderbilt Television Archives. You don't know Richard Pearl anymore, but he was on television 187 times, okay? Pontificating about exactly these two delusions. Paul Wolfowitz, who was also disappeared from our consciousness, he was on 180 times. Bloodthirsty rhetoric about why we needed to go and invade Iraq because they were developing weapons of mass destruction and they were aiding and abetting Al-Qaeda. Now, there were two doves who hardly got any attention at all. One was Scott Ritter. He was an inspector, and he said, there are no weapons of mass destruction, guys. We've inspected and inspected and inspected. The cat died of natural causes, okay? And Noam Chomsky, look at how, this is over a 20-to-1 ratio between hawks and doves, all during this period leading up to the war. Now, here's the delusion that Iraq had something to do with 9/11. Right after 9/11, people were asked about Iraq, and only about 16% felt Saddam Hussein had anything to do with it. But with all of this propaganda coming out, Cheney and all those folks, about 28% believed that Iraq had something to do with it. 2 years after we invaded Iraq, close to 60%, 56% of Americans believed a delusion. Okay, they believed a falsehood. Now, if you watched PBS, and that was your major source of information, sorry, PBS viewers did not buy it. If you watched Fox News, close to 60%. I read one study where almost 80% of Fox viewers believed Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11 and was making nuclear weapons. Now, 3 years into the war, George Bush is caught off guard at a press conference. A journalist asks him, what did Saddam Hussein have to do with 9/11? Check out his answer.
What did Iraq have to do with what?
The attack on the World Trade Center.
Nothing.
What did Iraq have to do with the attack on the World Trade Center? Nothing. Thanks a lot. Now, 3 years into the war, 90% of U.S. soldiers who were fighting and and putting their lives at risk believed that Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11. This is called a delusion. This is called a mental illness, except it wasn't one man with a cat who suffered from a mental illness. It was the majority of the American people, Congress, the Senate, who were duped, who were living in a trance. And we went off to war and we killed approximately 100,000 people. Now, one of the consequences of a delusion is that you're mentally ill. The man who goes and shot the cat, the man he thought poisoned his cat, he didn't think that that man was married, that he had 2 sons, that he created a widow, that he deprived these 2 sons of a father, that the guy also had his own father and mother, a grandpa and grandma, and they lost their son. And he also had a best friend. Have you ever lost your best friend? It's a trauma. It's a tragedy. There are a lot of other people involved in acting out a delusion. Now, some people say we killed 86,000 people. Some people say, some doctors say we killed 600,000. The consensus estimate is about 100,000 people that we killed based on acting on 2 delusions. This is what 100,000 people look like. Now, this is the stuff we do not want to see. This is the stuff NBC and CNN and even Charlie Rose are not bringing into our consciousness. Take a look at those bald heads in the front of that stadium, okay? Each one of those people has a wife or a husband and children, a father, a mother, and a grandchild or whatever, or a best friend. And there are many more than 100,000 people who've been impacted by our behavior. And our behavior, I mean, the 2 major reasons that Congress supported authorizing the president was that Saddam Hussein was developing nuclear weapons, and then he had aided and abetted Al-Qaeda. So one of the side effects of a delusion is repression and denial. You do not want to see what you did. You do not want to deal with it. So here's just a segment of stuff that will never appear on American television.
يضربوا المدنيين يعني؟
ايه مدنيين اللي كله هذا بيت عمنا كله مدنيين لك عسكريين كله مدنيين يضربون من الله ينتقم منهم حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل 5 جنازات من جنازات فات بيت يا الله يا الله يا الله يا الله الله انتقم منهم الله خلحقنا منهم وينك الله وينك الله.
So there are 100,000 stories like that simply do not get into our consciousness, and so we remain kind of immune from having to deal with the consequences of our collective behavior. Okay, I told you this isn't going to be entertaining, but I'll try to make it a little more entertaining if I can. Propaganda technique number 3. We're going to a whole different system now of another way that it gets into your brain. It's called vicarious and imitative learning. So here's social psychology. They do an experiment where they have a group of people sitting in a room, but one person is kind of a confederate, and he's doing nose pulling. Okay, he's doing that a lot. And he's also bouncing his foot up and down like that. Well, if they videotape these people in the room, and they notice that more and more people are doing this too. They're unconsciously copying this behavior. It's imitative learning. Okay, there's another study that shows mirror neurons and sewing. If I am sewing something, and you do an MRI or a PET scan of my brain, certain areas of the brain light up when I'm sewing. All right? Now, if you see a movie of a person sewing, You're not sewing. You're watching a movie of a person sewing. Similar areas of your brain light up as if you were sewing. You're going through a neurological copycat kind of event. So we're wired for imitative learning. It's also called vicarious learning. Now, behaviorists have learned a number of things about it. If you see a person, if you're a little boy and you're 10, and you see another boy on television who's 10, and he's helping a lady across the street, and then she gives him some candy, then you have a tendency to help little ladies across the street. You tend to copy good behavior if that behavior is reinforced. We've known about that for 40 years, okay? The same thing is happening with negative behavior. If you see a little boy, you identify with him, and you're 10 and he's 10, and he kicks a dog, and he doesn't pay any consequences. In fact, he giggles and has fun doing it. Then you tend to copy that behavior as well. If the behavior is reinforced, whether it's positive or negative, the behavior tends to get copied and imitated. So that's a law of psychology. Now take a look at The Cosby Show. It runs from 1985, 1992. Wins every sort of award. Cosby is a doctor. His wife is a lawyer. All of his kids are college-bound. They study hard. They avoid drugs. They listen to their parents. It's a very, very funny show. Okay? Martin Luther King's widow, Coretta King, said that The Cosby Show, the Huxtables, was the most positive portrayal of an African-American family in the history of American television. Bill Cosby has a PhD in real life, and he knows what he's doing, and he wanted to create a positive role model. And guess what? People in the African-American community paid attention, started to apply to college. All sorts of positive things seemed to be coming from The Cosby Show. Sidney Poitier made over 35 movies. He never once played the role of a pimp, a crook, a criminal, a hood. Never. He had plenty of opportunities to make lots of money playing bad people. And he said, no, I want to be a positive role model. My name is Mr. Tibbs, he said. Okay? So that was, and both these things have a positive impact on African Americans and on everybody. Cosby was seen by, it was one of the most popular television programs in the United States. Negative imitative learning works the opposite way. Beavis and Butthead have a show in which Butthead says, fire is cool. Well, a little boy saw that. He was 6 years old. He set his house on fire and killed his sister. Here's a show called Gone in 60 Seconds.
To steal your car. Hello, ladies. 60 seconds.
So that movie came out, very thrilling. When it opened in Canada, in Barnaby, Canada, actual car theft increased 60% on the following weekend after that movie opened. Nicolas Cage not only gets the car, he gets Angelina Jolie. So the behavior is reinforced. And that's very, very important in behavioral language. So here's an example of sexual behavior. Today, on primetime television, network family viewing hours, 70% of all shows in 2005 had sexual content. That was up from 56% in 1998. Among the top 20 most watched shows by teens, 70% included some kind of sexual content, and nearly half included sexual behavior. Now, do you remember Friends? Friends started, and so did Bill and Grace. Will and Grace. Those programs started as adult situation comedies that appeared originally after family viewing hours, about 10 o'clock at night. But then they got reruns, and then the shows were canceled, and then they were picked up, and you could watch Friends at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And Will and Grace too. So these shows depict a great deal of sexual behavior. Here's a scene from Friends. Now imagine this scene not being watched by adults, but by a 9-year-old kid at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
I think I'm sick.
Really?
I feel terrible. Please rub this on my chest.
No. You are not getting me this way.
Odd, I really need your help
No.
here. Fine, I'll rub it on myself.
Okay. So you just kind of rubbing it on yourself.
Yeah?
It's nice.
Are you kidding me? Is this turning you on?
Yes.
I can't believe it. What is it? Is it the rubbing or the smell?
It's all very, very good. So, you want to go, mix it up?
Not now. I'm sick.
Oh, come on, you big faker.
What happened to your rule about never sleeping with sick people?
Well, that was before all the vaporizing action.
Okay, if you really want to have sex.
Okay.
Work like a charm.
So now the negative consequences of exposing young children to sexual material before they're really developmentally ready, there is a clear correlation between the amount of sexual exposure in the media and the actual initiation of sexual behavior in real life. Boys who are exposed to media sexuality were 3 times more likely than non-exposed boys to engage in early sexual behavior. There are consequences to those kind of reruns that happen at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, it gets much more serious. If you remember Columbine, these are high school boys, Klebold and Harris, who went into their school and shot up all of the bullies. They killed, I don't know, it was the largest high school massacre in American history up to that time. They killed a teacher, wounded other people, and then shot themselves. And if you look at it from the point of view of media influence on their behavior, it's just amazing. For example, they liked Marilyn Manson's music. They liked to play the video game Doom. Doom is a game where you basically shoot people that emerge in a hallway. You're walking down a hallway, somebody comes out and you shoot them. That's what Doom is. That is a complete simulation of what they actually did in Columbine. They walked down the halls and picked out people and shot them. Okay? So here's an example of a song they really liked. It was Marilyn Manson's Music. Okay? Now, hold on. Before you take a look at this, let's say, because Klebold and Harris didn't like being harassed by bullies. Okay? Now, let's say you're a school counselor and you go to provide a workshop on bullying. So you try to talk to, how many of you people, I ask, were bullied in junior high school, elementary school? And I would say easily half of the audience raises their hand. Okay, so how do you deal with bullying? Well, you can have certain coping skills you can develop. You can go and talk to your school counselor confidentially. You can cope with it a number of specific ways, all right? You can develop positive coping techniques. There are a system of things that you can do. Now, then there's the record industry. David Geffen supports Marilyn Manson. Marilyn Manson's music is supposed to be sold only to adults. But why would an adult buy a song called Lunchbox? Adults don't carry lunchboxes. Kids do. So here's Marilyn Manson's solution to bullying. I'm not going to swear because I don't want this to be taken off YouTube. The big bully tried to stick his finger in my chest, tried to tell me he's the best, but I don't really give a good da-da, because I got my lunchbox, and I'm armed real well. Next, blah, 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 gonna get my medal, pow, pow, pow. How do you solve the problem of bullying? You take your father's handgun to school, and you shoot them. That's how you do it. Oh, that sells. That sells to 12-year-olds who are going through the 6th grade and feeling bullied. They kind of like this music. So here is a movie that was made in 1995 about Leonardo DiCaprio is fed up with his school, and he comes in to shoot the bullies. And by the way, Klebold and Harris watched this movie. Okay, it was 4 years before. This was another simulation, a media simulation of Columbine. Now, watch this movie carefully. Watch for the reinforcers. He's shooting people, but other people are high-fiving him and cheering him on. That's the reinforcer. Check this out. So the producer of that show knew something about behaviorism. It just wasn't that he was randomly killing people. He was killing bullies, and the people who supported him are very evident as the reinforcer, the high-fiver. That's important. So Klebold and Harris, in a sense, were victims of the media. Victims of Doom, victims of Basketball Diaries, victims of Marilyn Manson, and completely unprepared to deal with the media onslaught that elicited their behavior. Now we're going to talk about another subject, which is a toughie, hip-hop and imitative learning. Hip-hop has really proliferated in our society. It affects our fashions, it affects our values, and I want to talk a little bit about the early racist literature in the United States. In 1900, people wrote terrible things about black people. Charles Smith was a writer, a racist writer, and said that black males are terrifying predators who target helpless victims, and white women, and they're brutal and merciless and psychopathic and insatiate. D.W. Griffith made a movie called The Birth of a Nation, which is another racist movie. So we think, God, those days are over. American racism is over. Most white people feel that we've really made progress. We have a black president after all. Those are the days of the past. Well, Patricia Rose is a professor, an African-American professor in New England, and she used to like hip-hop. She said hip-hop, like Public Enemy, was really powerful, grassroots, political, artistic, not to be ignored. But hip-hop scared white people. It was too scary for them. And she says, this is, now what I'm giving you here is kind of the essence of what Patricia Rose says about hip-hop, and it is not very nice. So get yourselves ready, especially if you like hip-hop. She says, something happened to hip-hop around 1996. What's that? Nobody even knows about that. Well, big conglomerates started to buy up all these hip-hop labels. Def Jam Records, okay? There were 40 hip-hop labels that just got gobbled up by 4 major musical conglomerates, okay? And they said, let's increase the sex and violence, let's increase the obscenity, and let's decrease that political stuff and that artistic stuff. We want to make money, okay? We're not interested in that. So there are still some political groups and some artistic hip-hop groups, but that's not where the money is. The money, follow the money, and you follow Jay-Z, and you follow 50 Cent. Here's 50 Cent. Take a look at this image of a black male. I mean, he looks scary. He's pointing a gun at you. He looks like a inner city thug, right? He very closely resembles the racist caricatures of black males 100 years ago, predators. And here's his song, Keep Thinking I'm Candy Till Your Skull Get Popped and your brain jump out the top like a jack-in-the-box. In the hood, summertime is the killing season. It's hot out, this bub. That's a good enough reason. What's he saying? Well, he's saying this. He's talking to his girlfriend, and he says, you know, the kind of person I am, I'm kind of irritable. And if you think I'm your boyfriend, you know, you better watch it because I just might take out a gun and blow your head off because it's summertime. And summertime is a season for killing. You know, like duck hunting and deer. I kill people in the summer. I get irritable and I do that. Just letting you know. Now, would you like to dance to that idea? That's hip hop after 1996. Okay? Here's a Lil Wayne. Notice this is like an infomercial. This is not the Cosby Show. This is a guy who is going to Las Vegas, who is surrounded by women, surrounded by good luck, doesn't have to study hard in college, is absolutely enjoying himself. Drugs, gambling, promiscuity, fun, glitter, something definitely to copy. This influences. This is like the opposite of the Huxtables. Okay? This is a guy who's definitely being reinforced, but he's not working for it. It's just coming to him. It is a matter of luck. Okay? Lil Wayne is big time and having a good time out of it. So think of this as an infomercial for a black male growing up, or even a white male growing up in American society. It does influence, it does affect and impact behavior. Now, if you look at the lyrics, I'm going to just take a few. Thief. When it's time to eat a meal, I rob and steal. Okay, well that means that you're a thief. Misogynist. On the silly games played by the women, only happy if I'm going up in them. Okay. Drug addict. Love to pump crack, love to stay strapped. So the lyrics of modern hip-hop money-making songs underscore the following meta-themes about black males in the United States. Obscene, pimp, thief, misogynist, sociopath, violent, drug addict, promiscuous. This is the meta-meaning of what is being portrayed in these lyrics. Now, we've all been taught that this is the language of the inner city, but Patricia Rose says it's not the language of the inner city. It's the language of the businessman who took over the hip-hop industry in 1996. So Oprah Winfrey says hip-hop is hate speech with a beat. Jazz trumpeter Winston Marsalis says it's nothing more than ancient stereotypes wrapped in contemporary rhyme. 100-year-old stereotypes. Gladys Knight, it's distasteful, vulgar, it has not elevated the African American community, it's lowered our self-esteem. Ashley Judd, with its rape culture and insanely abusive lyrics and depiction of girls and women as hoes, it is the contemporary soundtrack of misogyny. So there are some very strident voices against hip-hop. Now let's take a look back at positive versus negative role models. In the Huxtable years, this is actually called the Huxtable effect in sociology. SAT scores for African American males and females went up. In 1990, 75% of black males graduated from high school. The Cosby Show mentioned that the kids were applying to Morehouse College. It's a black university. Well, in reality, the enrollments at Morehouse colleges went up 37% because of the Huxtable effect. Now, what's the Lil Wayne effect? SAT scores for black males went down. In 2010, only 47% of black males in the United States graduated from high school. That's down from 75%. Black male incarceration rates are up 50% since 1990. Something has happened. Now, it's hard to say that hip-hop caused all this. That's almost an untenable position. But behaviorism is telling us it certainly influenced it. Okay? Now, we're going to come back to hip-hop in a second, but I need to introduce another technique. It's called distraction and denial. We will come back to hip-hop. That means, please look over here, look over here, look at this. Isn't this interesting? We don't want you to look over here. We want to distract you from this and have you look at this. Okay? That's the nature of this little psychic propaganda game. Here's a good example.
This is the Arctic. Join Coca-Cola and World Wildlife Fund to help protect it, so the polar bear always has a place to call home. To donate and help create a safe refuge for the polar bear, look for white Coke cans and caps.
Now, isn't that wonderful? Isn't that nice that Coca-Cola has a new can that you can buy, and when you buy a Coke, you're contributing to saving the polar bear. My God, thank you for being so green. What a progressive distraction. Over here, take a look. What's being denied here? Coca-Cola is a gross polluter. Coca-Cola produces 25 million plastic bottles per day, more than 10 billion per year. A plastic bottle is discarded, goes into landfills, and takes between 450 to 750 years to decompose. Okay? That little plastic Coke bottle that you have has a 90% probability of surviving for the next 500 years in a junkyard, in a pit. Okay? Even after repeated pleas, Coca-Cola only recycles about 10% of its plastic bottles. Really? Now, one 12-ounce can of Coke, it contains 10 teaspoons of sugar. That's one more than an adult male's entire recommended daily allowance. Drinking one 12-ounce can of Coke raises your diabetes per day, raises your diabetes rate 15%. Drinking one 12-ounce can of Coke per day for a year will put 18 pounds on you. 20 years ago, more teenagers drank milk than Coke. Currently, it is the opposite. That's the power of advertising.